Thank you again, everybody, for joining today's webinar. My name is Adam Hops. I'm with the National Operations Center of Excellence. Today's webinar is part of the Road Weather Spotlight series, and it's going to be on mitigating and managing low visibility events. Before I turn it over to David Johnson, a few things about housekeeping and webinar process. We will be monitoring the chat box throughout the webinar. Feel free to, if you have any technical questions or needs in there, please go ahead and use that. If you have any questions for the presenters, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section that's on the bottom or top of your screen. That'll allow us to track all the questions, make sure that we're keeping everything covered. We are recording this. We will release a recording in the next week or so. Please be sure to sign up for the NOCoE newsletter or check the NOCoE YouTube channel for that to be released. If you have any questions for me, again, use the chat box for any issues, and again, for the speakers, please use the Q&A. So thank you again to the FHWA Road Weather Management team for putting this together, David and his whole team over there. These webinars have been fantastic, and today's topic is certainly an interesting one for everybody to take a look at. Thanks, David. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate the intro, and welcome everybody to our Road Weather Spotlight series webinar on mitigating and managing low visibility events. Our Road Weather Spotlight series, webinar series, highlights road weather management innovations, technologies, strategies, and tools. We're looking at road weather data sources and applications. We talk about maintenance and operations as it pertains to road weather. We also like to cover road weather research and innovation, R&D development, as well as severe road weather impacts that happen across our country and internationally as well. This is a really good webinar series that we appreciate you attending, and let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So for those who don't know me, my name is David Johnson. I'm the team leader at Federal Highway that covers the Managing Disruptions to Operations team. That includes work zone management, traffic incident management, planned special events, operational data, and then obviously road weather management as well. Before we get going here, we got a great group of speakers, but I need to cover a few items before we get going here. So on our disclaimer page, I have to cover this. This presentation was created and is being co-presented by both Federal Highway and an outside entity. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of FHWA or the US DOT. The contents do not necessarily reflect the official policy of US DOT. The U.S. government does not endorse products or manufacturers. Trademarks or manufacturers' names appear in this presentation only because they're considered essential to the objective of the presentation. They are included for informational purposes only and are not intended to reflect a preference, approval, or endorsement of any one product or entity. Except for the statutes and regulations cited, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the states or the public in any way. This presentation is intended only to provide information regarding existing requirements under the law. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Let's go ahead and start talking about our topic here, which is the low visibility events. We've seen quite a few of these pop up, making national headlines. So we wanted to set the stage before we introduce our speakers to talk about some of their research and innovation in this area. When we talk about types of road weather, low visibility events, what are we talking about? Well, specifically, we're looking at things like fog. We're looking at blowing sand, soil, dirt, or dust, smog, wildfire, smoke, blowing snow. Those are the low visibility events that when we say low visibility events, these are the types of events we're talking about. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So why are we interested in low visibility events as it pertains to our roadways? Well, we know these are ubiquitous events. They happen all over the country. There's really no particular region or climate that really encourages these types of events. They can happen all over the place, all over our country. And they're often very sudden. They come upon our drivers and create unsafe driving conditions. They can be very small, very localized events, sometimes, less than a mile. But they can have very severe effects on the driver. Obviously, if you can't see where you're going, that causes all kinds of issues. This obviously can cause crashes and incidents to occur. This chart here is showing data that was pulled from our National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA's FARS database. And we wanted to take a look at crashes that occur when low visibility conditions are present. Now, it's important to note that during this data highlights that low visibility conditions were present, but not necessarily causing the crashes to take place. But still, we can glean some important information from this. And as you can see, just looking at the fatal motor vehicle crashes over the last 5 years, with low visibility conditions present, we've seen just over 2,000 fatal motor vehicle crashes. If we're looking at injury only while low visibility conditions are present, we're over just over 42,000. And then PDO, or property damage only, pretty significant, over 116,000. So while this may seem like, percentage-wise, there's not a whole lot here. If you look at the raw numbers, there's quite a bit of crashes that are caused or have low visibility conditions that are present when crashes occur. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So setting the stage, so some of the recent high impact, low visibility events that I kind of mentioned earlier, we saw on May 1st, there was a localized dust storm in Illinois. And that this really is an interesting case, because it can kind of speak to the different types of low visibility events. It's not just what you think of with fog or smog or smoke. In this case, it was a localized dust storm in Illinois, and it was caused by farmland, freshly tilled and planted farms, and in coordination with wind gusts of 35 to 45 miles an hour. So that dry tilled ground was picked up by high gusts of wind, and that blew dust across I-55, causing a 72 vehicle crash, which involved multiple fatalities and injuries. The National Weather Service has a webpage that kind of discusses the atmospheric and meteorological aspects of that event. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that link. And then also one that's more recent was the October 23rd, 2023 super fog event in Louisiana. This was caused by a mixture of wildfire smoke and fog, calling it smog or super fog. This resulted in a 168 vehicle crash on I-55 with multiple fatalities and injuries. And the National Weather Service also has an interesting webpage there if you want to take a look at some of the scientific atmospheric details of why the event occurred. But as you can see, just in the last year or so, actually a 1 year anniversary from the Illinois dust storm today, these are high impact events. These aren't fender benders. These cause multiple fatalities as well as injuries. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So for those who are familiar with the Road Weather Management Program, we have a lot of resources. We've done a lot of outreach on some technology advancements. One of those is from Arizona DOT. Obviously in Arizona, they have very dry conditions, so dust storms are very common. They occur every spring, and they do create severe safety concerns on I-10 due to reduced visibility, which has caused multiple car crashes. The dual use safety technology, or dust warning system, was implemented by Arizona DOT to provide detection and early warning to these dust storms. And the system was installed on I-10 between Bowie and San Simon, as well as a 10-mile segment of I-10 between Tucson and Phoenix. Some of the system components, and we'll look at this a little bit more over the next few slides, but some of the system components that were used that several of our speakers will also be talking about is installation of environmental sensor stations, or ESS. They also use closed circuit television camera for ground truthing and visual confirmation of the event. And then they also installed precipitation and visibility sensors at that site as well. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a little bit more detail, and you can kind of see some of the ITS and other technology advancements that they use for this system. But they've used programmable logic controllers that automatically trigger devices due to wind speed or minimum visibility threshold. So this is an automatic system that will display dynamic message signs and messaging to the public so that they're aware that there's low visibility due to dust up ahead. They also use highway advisory radio services that can be used to alert drivers if they're listening to the radio. They have stored messages that they use. The sensors also send out email alerts to a certain group to alert highway ops, as well as law enforcement of high winds and low visibility conditions. And then there's also variable speed limits signs that are used that are staggered through the 10-mile stretch to help drivers come up and slow down and be prepared for low visibility up ahead. Next slide, please. We do have a really good fact sheet on our webpage that goes into a lot more detail on this system. It's a really interesting piece. It was also highlighted in public roads, and there's been international attention to the dust detection system. So if you have any interest in something like this, take a look at our webpage at the link below. Some of the challenges and lessons learned that Arizona DOT wanted to communicate in this was the initial calibration, as with any sort of sensors or ITS deployment, can be a bit of a challenge. So setting up, set trigger points for when parameters are triggered, such as with dynamic message signs, but also the atmospheric conditions that need to be triggered for VSL thresholds, as well as email notifications and alerts. It was a challenge with meaningful review of weather, crash, and system performance data to validate the system, as well as providing things like benefit cost analysis. That's typically very challenging with these types of deployments because both weather events and crashes can be highly random. And then also the focus on highway segments where there's recurring issues. So, these dust storms and low visibility events obviously don't fit into set boundaries. They can happen any place, anytime. So it's difficult to figure out where exactly on interstates or highways that a system like this would need to be used. Obviously, you want to use data. You want to look at recurring crashes and intensities and frequencies when you decide to deploy something like this. But those are some of the challenges that Arizona pointed out in that fact sheet. So again, I encourage everybody to take a look at our webpage and that fact sheet if you're interested in more. Next slide, please. All right, so our first speaker we're going to have is Roy Reed. Roy Reed is a district traffic operations manager for the Staunton and Culpeper districts of the Virginia Department of Transportation. He has served in this role for 10 years. Roy has 28 years of experience in operations, traffic management, and incident response. Before joining VDOT in his current role, he worked for URS as a TOC manager and shift supervisor. Roy also served 6 years in the U.S. Air Force. Thank you for your service. And with that, Roy, I will turn it over to you and look forward to hearing what you have to say on this.
All righty, thank you. Let me share my slides. All right, so I'm going to be talking to you about our Afton fog light system. So Afton Mountain is on Interstate 64 in the state of Virginia, and it actually is part of two districts, the Stanton and the Culpeper district. It runs from mile marker 96 or exit 96 to about exit 107 are our boundaries, and we have fog lights that are in that area, various other ITS devices. So the system was first deployed in 1996 is when it was first installed. And in that installation, it included 183 in-pavement lights. And those lights at the time were quartz. So, so also with that were 5 fog detectors. So I have a picture of the original fog detectors that were installed, which is on the far right. And then the original signage that went up, which basically tells people that you have in-pavement lighting guide lights ahead with flashing beacons. So 1997, there was an upgrade to the system where they replaced the original in-pavement lighting. And my sources say that it went from quartz at that time to incandescent. We also installed more message signs about that time. 2008 was another upgrade to our in-pavement lighting where we went from incandescent to LED. And 2014 through 16, roughly 17, that's under mine. When I got here, we were doing this After Mountain Safety project where we upgraded our message signs, went to type 1 signs, full color message signs. We also added more infrastructure. Originally, there was thoughts of or plans to deploy a variable speed limit system. But after looking at the data and studies, it was determined for us, we were not going to deploy a variable speed limit system. But we did install infrastructure for future growth and advancement. Also, additional RWIS devices, road weather information systems, along with speed sensors and fiber optic cable. So what we currently have out there, we have RWIS devices across Afton Mountain, of 8 different locations, along with 14 message signs, CMSs, that are dedicated to Afton Mountain messaging. Let me back up a quick second. So where our RWIS devices or stations and have the devices, we have vision, rain sensors, temperature, barometric pressure, wind monitor, road condition sensors, and data loggers. Especially with the visibility sensors, I mean, that's very important for us. We have high instances of fog on Afton Mountain, and it tends to be, for the most part, at the top of the mountain. With Afton Mountain, you go up either westbound or eastbound, you're going up the grade to the top of the mountain. About mile marker 99 is where the mountain peaks on the roadway. And then if you're going east to west, then you're going down grade. And most of our time, the fog is concentrated at the top of the mountain. Not to say that we don't have fog that will envelop the entirety of the mountain, but most cases it's centered at the top. Our CMSs, we have 5 that are dedicated to the mainline interstate as you're approaching Afton Mountain. And then we have quite a few signs. We have another 9 that are on our feeder roads or roads as you're approaching the interstate to let motorists know what kind of conditions are on Afton Mountain as they're making their trips, making their way. Also, CMSs, I didn't give you a number of CMSs, but we're about every mile there's a camera. So we have pretty much 100% coverage on Afton Mountain from the CCTVs. And then we have in-pavement lights still. We have 143 in-pavement lights, as I said on the previous slide, they have been upgraded to LED. I have a picture of one of our lights on the right shoulder. The way, as you see, we're on the right shoulder and left shoulder of the interstate, and that's both east and westbound crossing Afton Mountain. And then I've got a picture of one of our RWA stations. It's not on Afton Mountain because I couldn't get a good enough shot, but this gives you a picture of what we have deployed out there on the interstate. This is basically to give you an idea, a view of what we have. So right now, this depicts some of our message signs, along with our camera locations, our weather sensor locations, yes. So, and also this is simulating a severe fog event. So if you were to dig into this and look at it, you would see our messaging for dense fog on the mountain, use caution on our feeder signs, and then our interstate signs, basically, it says dense fog, reduce speed. So how do we utilize our system? Our RWIS devices on Afton Mountain communicate directly into the TOC. And also they will, so what will happen is as your visibility sensors are reading, getting their visibility, we reach certain thresholds and that will trigger an alert into the Traffic Operations Center. The TOC operators will in turn take those alerts, and then they will launch an incident response plan based on the visibility level. So as you can see here, minor, we're 1,201 to 1,400 not square feet, but feet. And so anything above 1,400 feet of visibility, we call that clear. And then so with our minor, they activate just the lights. So they would do a response plan to activate the lights. And if fog conditions continue to degrade, then it would change based on the conditions. So if it's between 500 and 1,200 feet visibility, then they'll do a moderate fog condition plan, or major if it's between 200 and 500, or severe if it's less than 200 feet of visibility. Now, the one difference in the, let me back up. The moderate, we have lights, but we also add our interstate, our mainline message signs to the plan. With major, we add all of our signs and lights to our plan. And with severe, what gets added, we change our messaging, but emails go to district management. One of the other things that we tend to deal with out here, I'll show you our matrix, is high winds on Afton Mountain. So we have common occurrences of winds that are consistently greater than 30 miles an hour. So in those cases, we will post high winds on mountain, use caution. And then freezing fog. We've had several occasions for fog, especially as we get into the winter months, October, November, where we'll have temperatures that are 30 degrees or less. And we also have fog conditions. So as you can see in this matrix, we would post a message that says black ice possible. But another thing that our operators would do for this is that they would in turn make notifications to our area headquarters. And so we would have people respond to the interstate and treat the roadway as necessary. So that is what I have to talk to you about on Afton Mountain.
Thanks, Roy. That was really good. Appreciate the overview, and I thought the matrix with the decision points was really good. If you have any questions for Roy, go ahead and put it in the Q&A chat pod. If there's any time after all the speakers have gone through, we'll have a little bit of time for a Q&A. But right now, if you have any for Roy, just go ahead and type them out, and he put his email address in the chat as well. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks again, Roy. Appreciate you joining. Our next speaker is going to be Mike Fontaine. Let him get ready here. Mike Fontaine is the Associate Director for VTRC Safety Operations and Traffic Engineering Team. His team conducts research in the broad areas of highway safety, traffic engineering, operations, ITS, and connected and automated vehicles. He is actively involved with research in highway safety, traffic monitoring, emerging crowdsourced data streams, and intelligent transportation systems. He also serves as the chair of the Transportation Research Board Committee for Urban Transportation Data and Information Systems. Mike earned his PhD in civil engineering from the University of Virginia, and he's a registered professional engineer in Virginia. Prior to becoming associate director, he spent 14 years as a researcher at VTRC. He's also worked at the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, Old Dominion University, and the city of Charlottesville. Mike, thanks for joining us, and looking forward to hearing what you got to say.
All right, thanks, David. You never realize how long your intro was until you hear someone actually speak it out, so I apologize for how long that was. So I'm going to talk about another project in Virginia where we deployed a variable speed limit system on Interstate 77. So this was a great project where it was a good collaboration between us in the research office, as well as our local Salem district folks, as well as we had great consultant support on this project. So just to orient everyone about where I'm talking about, I-77 is a rural 4-lane mountainous freeway. It's located in a place called Fancy Gap, Virginia. Don't let the name fool you. There is nothing fancy about Fancy Gap, Virginia. It's an extremely rural area. It's relatively little local traffic. It serves as a major through corridor, though. If you continue going on south on I-77 into North Carolina, it'll take you to Charlotte. North, it'll take you through West Virginia into Ohio. So we see a lot of through traffic. The directional ADT on the road is about 18,000 vehicles per day in each direction. It's a very high truck volume corridor. We have about 27% tractor trailers on this corridor, so a lot of freight movement here. Base speed limit's about 65 miles an hour. And what's most noteworthy about it is as you're going south towards the North Carolina line, we have a 4% downhill grade for about 6 miles going southbound. So you can imagine that sustained downhill grade combined with trucks can create a lot of speed issues. Over on the left side of the slide here, you can see a picture that was taken about 50 years ago when the road first opened up. And so the other thing you can notice here is, we're basically hugging the side of a mountain as we're going through this corridor. And sometimes we have some pretty significant differences in elevation between the northbound and southbound direction. So it's not strictly a case where both directions of travel are parallel to one another. Okay, so this corridor, we've had a lot of concerns for a long time where there were very frequent dense fog that will come into the corridor and really impair visibility. This has been a long-standing problem on the corridor, so we've had a lot of visibility sensors that have been deployed out there for some time. In fact, when we looked at sort of the historic average, somewhere in the first 15 miles of I-77 coming into Virginia has fog, an average of the equivalent of 29 days a year. So we're talking about an area where there's a lot of fog. It's very predictable and recurring that we have there. So even though fog doesn't necessarily always come on a schedule, we know that it's going to happen in this location. And so because of the fog combined with the high truck traffic and the steep downhill grade, we had a lot of problems with chain reaction rear end crashes when we had these very severe visibility events. Probably the most recent one that generated a lot of concern that led to the project I'm going to be talking about today was an Easter Sunday crash in 2013. That was a 95-car crash event that had 3 fatalities. And when you talk to the troopers that responded to that crash, They said that if you were standing at the back of the tractor trailer that was involved in the crash, you could not see its cab. The fog was so thick. And in the meantime, our VDOT folks in the Traffic Operations Center were able to look at the speeds. People were still going 70 miles an hour on the highway with that kind of impaired visibility. So when we look at the crashes that we have here, I thought it was interesting that David mentioned earlier that nationally only 0.5% of crashes happen during reduced visibility. On this corridor, 11% of our crashes happen during fog. So we see a very large representation of crashes that happen during these reduced visibility events. And 84% of those crashes that happened during fog were happening in that southbound downhill direction. So that again kind of indicates that combination of impaired visibility with the downward grade and high truck traffic is probably contributing to what's going on. So our crash rate was more than double during fog than it was during clear conditions. You can see in these pie charts here how the characteristics changed a lot too, where only about a quarter of our crashes were fatal in injury when we had clear conditions. It's almost half when we had some sort of visibility impairment. And likewise, the number of crashes involved changed quite a bit as well. The most common type of crash we have when it's clear out is single vehicle run off the road, fixed object crash. When we get into fog, we see a lot more 2 and 3 or more vehicle crashes. Again, because of that chain reaction, rear end collisions becomes kind of the predominant crash that we see in those conditions. So because of all these problems, VDOT initially tried traditional traffic control improvements to try and deal with this. So we tried wider edge lines, larger warning signs, improved delineation. And despite all that, we weren't really able to see the needle move very much in terms of safety. So because of that, VDOT became interested in looking at variable speed limits as an alternative means to try and control speeds in the corridor and hopefully improve safety. So one thing that's important to mention is if you're considering using variable speed limits, you need to make sure that you have the appropriate legal authority to change speeds. So for us, we actually had to have a legislative change that would enable us to post variable speed limits on our highways. And so here's an example from the text from the Code of Virginia that basically granted our commissioner the power to post variable speed limits. So just a few logistical things that we need to do is normally when you're setting a speed limit, you're going to do a speed study that will be signed and sealed by the district traffic engineer, the engineer doing the study. In our case, since we're not setting a speed limit specifically, we're basically defining an algorithm for changing the speed. So basically the algorithm for changing the speed limits has to be signed and sealed for each deployment of variable speed limits that we do in this state. So in this case, our district traffic engineer would have to sign and seal that to say that they approve of the logic that's being used to change these speed limits. In Virginia, our variable speed limits can be regulatory or advisory. So we do have that option. And then one thing that's important to mention too is that right now in Virginia, we can only use automated speed enforcement in work zones and school zones. So it is not a tool for us just on a regular section of freeway. So the variable speed limits that we were putting in for this fog system had to be manually enforced traditionally. So we could not rely on automated speed enforcement here. Virginia DOT also created some requirements and guidance so that we make sure that we're consistent in how we apply variable speed limits around the state. We have right now 2 active systems, including this one at I-77. So basically the guidance that we have includes some requirements for the concept of operations. We have to have interoperability between our district traffic operations centers. So we have failover if something goes down, requirements for monitoring and data archiving. Obviously, if we're going to write tickets on the variable speed limit, we need to have a secure data archive that can be used in court to show if someone was exceeding a speed limit. There are requirements for the actual traffic control devices for the variable speed limits. We do permit overhead or dual shoulder mounted signs. There has to be clear signing indicating the start and end of the variable speed limit corridor. And the signs can be spaced no more than 2 miles apart because we don't want anyone to feel like they've been trapped by not knowing what the speed limit is. So we require frequent spacing of the signs. As far as the algorithm goes, our requirements are we can have no more than a 10-mile-an-hour step down between adjacent pairs of signs as you're traversing the corridor. Although once you get out of the zone where you're reducing speeds, you can increase speeds rapidly. So we want to have a slow step down so people hopefully start reducing their speed slowly as they go into that reduced speed zone. And the speed limits apply across, it's the same speed limit across all lanes. We do not have a different speed limit for the left lane versus the right lane or anything like that. So right now, everything is same speed limit across all lanes. Okay, so about the system that we deployed on I-77. So the total system cost about $7.5 million, and it was activated in October 2016. That $7.5 million also included cost to upgrade power and communications. Since we were in a very rural area, there was a lot of power upgrades required to support the system. 13 dynamic message signs were installed along the corridor. We had 36 full matrix variable speed limit signs, which is that picture that you see on the right side there, which were 60 by 60. We had 8 VSL cutout signs where only the speed limit changed, which is what you see over there on the left. We had 25 CCTV cameras, 22 Wavetronics side-fire radar sensors, 14 Vizsla visibility sensors, which is what's there at the bottom. The signs were spaced about a mile apart over the course of this corridor. The one thing that I'll mention that folks may be interested in, there's some debate about what color these LED or changeable signs should be in fog and what color transmits the best through fog. Before we did this deployment, we actually did a study with the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute where they have a closed course facility where they actually have the capability to create fog when the conditions are just right. And so we actually compared driver legibility and visibility using these actual signs using both amber and white light to see which one was better. I think a lot of research sort of suggests amber might be better than white, but people were concerned that we wanted to use white to try and replicate the regular regulatory signs as closely as possible. So that study showed that the white light was not substantially worse than what we saw with the amber lights. So we ended up going with white lights for these two signs. Just to give you a flavor for what the corridor looks like, on the left side of your screen is the Virginia-North Carolina line, and we're going into the state of Virginia, going left to right across this screen. And so the blue boxes are the locations where we had the visibility sensors, the orange dots are where we have speed sensors, and the green boxes are where we had the variable speed limit signs. And so one thing to point out here too is going northbound, which is the uphill direction, we did have a truck climbing lane for a portion of the corridor, so that on that, while it was very steep downhill direction, we were able to bring the trucks out of the main stream of traffic going uphill in the other direction. Okay, so in terms of developing the control algorithm, because this area had been fog prone for quite some time, we had a lot of ARWA stations that were able to give us visibility data in feet. And so because of that, we had a good track record of what the visibility was like during fog events. And so essentially our starting point for the control algorithm was essentially back calculating the stopping sight distance equation that many of us learned about when we took highway design or did roadway design work. And so the idea here is that we initially thought about, okay, what if we set the speed limit as a function of the available visibility based off of stopping sight distance? Now, we went and looked at patterns of fog within the corridor. And so we can see here that this is basically, again, going from North Carolina on the left into the state on the right. There was an area where we had a much more dense fog that tended to occur. And so we could view some patterns here where it wasn't quite as predictable as what Roy mentioned on Afton Mountain, where it was always at the top of the mountain, but there was a certain zone where the fog was more likely to occur. So once we determined that, we went out and set out some portable speed data collection trailers to look at how drivers were traveling during these fog events. And so if we look over here on the right, the purple line there is basically the safe speed based off of stopping sight distance. Each of the dots there represents an average 15-minute speed on the corridor. And so the top line is kind of a best fit line that goes right through what people were actually driving during these fog events. So this is showing average speed by visibility. And so what we found is people were driving a lot faster than that safe stopping sight distance based speed, sometimes more than 20 miles an hour average speed faster than what would have been safe based off of that stopping sight distance equation. So when we created the algorithm, we were concerned that if we just adopted this strict stopping sight distance based interpretation of what we put out there, we might actually make safety worse because we could increase speed variance if we get some people that are strictly complying with what we're telling them, and then some people that are driving the way they've always driven. That could create a lot of variance, and that big differential in speed could really create a lot of problems for us, especially in limited visibility. So instead, we kind of split the difference between the two. So we looked at what people were driving before the system went in. We looked at the stopping sight distance safe speed, and we picked something that's intermediate to try and encourage people to reduce their speeds as they're going through the corridor, and hopefully still give them something they perceived as a reasonable speed that they would comply with. So essentially the way the system works is recommended speeds are calculated at every location along the corridor. We start at the most critical location. We smooth and group the speed limit transitions into the system. It's a semi-automated system where speed limit recommendation is made. It's approved by an operator at the Traffic Operations Center. And we have update the speeds every 6 minutes on the corridor, partially because the fog can be so variable in how it moves in and out. We want to make sure we're not oscillating the speeds too frequently. Education and outreach, this was really focused a lot on, since it was a lot of through traffic, a lot of advanced signing. You can see here the signing that we have coming into the corridor where we're alerting them that the speeds are going to vary, that there is a reason why we're doing this, that there's reduced fog. We did create an app for the police officers to view the variable speed limit system, but we didn't really do a lot of local outreach because really there wasn't as much local traffic problems as there were through traffic. So a lot of signing. Now, one important thing here is the police officers obviously don't want to be pulled over on the side of the road in dense fog pulling people over. So I would say there was not a lot of active enforcement during the fog events out of concern for officer safety, but the speeds could be used if there was a crash to write some tickets or make some assessments after the fact. Okay, so let's look at what the system did. So on the left, we have before data. On the right, we have after data. This is at milepost 4.4, which is just at the southern end of the dense fog zone. The green line is the stopping sight distance-based safe speed, which is the same for both before and after. The blue line is kind of the best fit line through all the data. And so keeping in mind the green line has remained the same, you can see the speeds have clearly come down. We're seeing a lot closer alignment between what people are driving and what we recommend the safe speed to be. Since we probably have a lot of engineers on this call, one thing I'll mention is the data on the left is 15-minute data. The data on the right is 6-minute data. That's why it looks a little noisier and is more spread out. It has nothing to do with increased variability in the speeds, just because data gets smoothed out the more you aggregate it. But we have seen the speeds come down. And when we look at the speed reductions by visibility, we've seen on average about a 5 to 6 mile an hour reduction in average speeds once the variable speed limit system went in across the board. So drivers were reacting, they were reducing their speeds across the corridor. Now, what's particularly exciting to us is we looked at the safety on the corridor for 3 years before the variable speed limit system went in, and then 3 years after the variable speed limit system was activated. And luckily for us, since this was turned on in 2016, or 3 years after did not include any pandemic data, so that's not influencing things. And so if you look over here at the total before and total after columns in the table, before the 3 years before the variable speed limit system was on, we had 23 fatal and injury crashes. The 3 years after it was turned on, we only had 5. And our crashes in the 3 years before the system were 49, down to 13 in the after period. So we saw basically a 75% reduction in crashes that were happening during fog in the corridor. And what's really particularly dramatic to us is that southbound direction, where we really had the safety problem, we went from 34 crashes in 3 years before we turned the system on to only 2 in the 3 years afterwards. So we had a very dramatic improvement, especially in that downhill southbound direction. And so for those of you that are into safety analysis, we did do an empirical Bayes crash modification factor development. And so we were able to get very significant, statistically significant crash modification factors if you're into that. One thing that was also interesting is even though the variable speed limits were only activated during fog conditions, we also saw some evidence that overall severity improved on the corridor. So if you drive in the corridor now with all the variable speed limit signs and big DMSs. Clearly, there's something different about this corridor than the average interstate that you drive through. And so we have seen some evidence that there might be around a 10% reduction in fatal and injury crashes, even in non-fog conditions, because of this infrastructure that we put in. So just to summarize, we've seen the mean speeds have gone down about 5 to 6 miles an hour. Fog crashes have dropped by over 75%. One thing that I would offer is sort of a best practice when looking at compliance. What we saw is even though we were slowly stepping down speeds going into the fog, the drivers tended not to decelerate too much until they actually saw the fog and were in it. So that kind of implies that for future variable speed limit systems that they're looking at fog where you've got sort of a predictable pattern, you space your signs a little bit closer together going into those fog transition zones so you can more rapidly drop the speed limits going into the fog zones. But generally, the drivers were reducing speeds, but they wanted some visual confirmation why they needed to reduce the speeds. So just think about that transition in and out. And using the DMSs so that drivers understand why you're reducing the speeds was very important, I think, into the overall effectiveness of the system. So with that, there's my contact information here. If anyone's interested in more detail on the algorithm or the results or anything else that we did, that QR code there, if you take a picture of that, it'll take you to a report, and I'll drop a link in the chat box as well that has a lot more information. But with that, I'll wrap up, and if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the chat.
Thank you, Mike. Very good, informative presentation. I really appreciate you touching on the legality of VSL in everybody's particular states and areas. Also, you mentioned automatic speed enforcement, the speed safety camera. Technology is becoming more and more used across the country. As you mentioned, it's primarily used in work zones and school zones right now. But very interesting presentation, particularly with the before and after data that you have. So thank you for sharing that. Again, if you have any questions for Roy or for Mike, as we go into our next presentation, feel free to drop those in the Q&A pod. And if we have any time at the end of the presentations, we'll be sure to have some open Q&A. So if you have any questions in the meantime, please put them in the Q&A pod. We have one more presentation from Jose de Alba. Jose, I'll give you a little bit of time here to pull up your slides. Jose de Alba is the office chief for the Office of Intelligent Transportation Systems at Caltrans. Jose has worked at Caltrans for over 14 years. As office chief, Jose oversees the Traffic Management Center, leads efforts in planning, designing, deploying, and managing the district's ITS infrastructure, and oversees the work zone operations branch. Prior to his current role, Jose spent a decade at the California High-Speed Rail Authority as both a project manager and a contract manager. Jose holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from California State University. He is a licensed professional in his field and holds certifications in Lean Six Sigma, as well as project management professional. Jose, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours. I'll let you pull up your slides, and we can go ahead and get started when you're ready.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, David. Can you see my slides?
Yep, sure can.
Okay. Let me. Okay. Okay, so David gave a little bit of my background, and if anyone would like to reach out to me at the end of the slide deck, I'll post my contact information. My presentation today will be on the fog detection and warning system that we use here in Fresno, California, in the Central Valley. Ironically enough, I was actually the project engineer that helped implement this project many, many years ago. I since left the DOT, worked various assignments, came back to the DOT, but this time in a management role, I'm supervising or managing the fog detection and warning system. Pretty much full circle. talking about the system, managing the future of it, and determining next steps, and trying to improve it overall. Just brief agenda. I'll go over the history, capital costs, theory of operations, operation and maintenance, which is always fun, lessons learned, and where we plan to take the system next, and discussions we're having internally. I won't read this whole thing, but here in the valley, in the Central Valley of California, we have what's known as Tule fog. It gets its name from the Tule grass wetlands that grow in the region. The Tule fog forms when moisture in the wetlands evaporate, especially during the fall and winter months when the air cools down. It's a particularly dense fog that is unique to the valley here. I don't know the science behind it or why the fog is so dense, but the wetlands in our region combined with the geography of being in a valley has definitely something to do with it. And over the years, a series of large vehicle pileups led to this and other projects, to help mitigate crashes in the area. So the San Joaquin Valley is in between the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges, which are in this area here, and the Pacific Coast mountain ranges over in this area here, with Fresno being right in the center. And it creates a bowl essentially holding the fog in and in place. This next slide kind of really details, brings home the point of the fog in the area. So you see San Francisco, San Francisco here, Fresno here, LA over here, just kind of to get your bearings straight here. And all this here in the center is the Central Valley, and it's essentially a bowl of fog, and Tule fog is what we call it here in the area. And this is a very common occurrence here in the valley. Let's see, just going over a little bit of the history and timeline. Our timeline and history goes all the way back to 1992 with our first program or project to help mitigate incidents here in the valley, with the most recent being the fog detection and warning system here implemented in 2007, the fog detection and warning system. Prior to 92, our traffic management center did not exist here in Fresno, and wasn't initiated until a series of high-profile crashes related to fog happened in the area. And then 92, 93, that's actually when the traffic management center was built, and we've been here ever since. Next slide. Here I'm showing basically a table of major incidents. This, of course, doesn't list all of our incidents, but just the major incidents that we've captured over the years. And most of them being on State Route 99. Sorry about that. State Route 99, and a few incidents on I-5 here that I'll talk about shortly. But bringing it back to the fog detection and warning system, like I said, that started in 2007. I'm sorry, I lost my place here. So it started back in 2007 with the catalyst being this particular incident here, where we had 99 vehicles in a crash, with factor being with fog being a factor in that particular crash. 2 fatalities. A few months later, unfortunately, we had another incident where 19 vehicles were involved. And when we started when the project was initiated after this first incident in November, we were very much under the gun and had a sense of urgency to make something happen. And when we actually had that incident, or another incident a few months later, it really put the pressure on us to deliver a system to help mitigate incidents out there. So the project was roughly approximately $12 million and located on State Route 99 between Avenue 384 and South Avenue, which probably means nothing to you folks, but it's roughly a 12-mile segment that the project limits covered in that area, which is just south of Fresno. I won't show too many pictures, but most of you already know what these major pileups look like. This one just happens to be, this one was on Route 99, again, just south of Fresno. But this particular one was back in 2002, where 90 vehicles were involved and 2 fatalities. Just the same data as the table, but in a map format. You can see up here in this region, here's Fresno, and then just south of Fresno, you have all the major incidents related to fog, or where fog was a factor. And that's here on Route 99. Out here on Interstate 5. Mainly high winds in this area, but dust storms can happen if the conditions are right. This particular dust storm here that is identified, 104 vehicles incident happened here. And this one here was not a dust storm, but it was a fog related issue. And I do consider this one an outlier for Interstate 5 in this particular area, in this region, because like I said, most of the incidents are related to wind speeds out in I-5. Winds can reach upwards of 80 miles per hour in this region of the valley, which wreaks havoc for RV, semi-trucks, and camper trailers crossing I-5 here in this region. Bringing it back to the fog detection and warning system, some of the capital and system integration costs. The cost includes planning, design and integration, and construction, with the goal being a turnkey system. And I talked about the limits earlier, just approximately over 12 miles of project limits just south of Fresno, and the contractor that we utilized was ICX Transportation, which they specialize in real-time systems, and we chose them because they brought that experience, that previous experience with them, and they helped us to deliver that project. Next slide. So the system components and quantity here. So 42 CMSs, 43 microwave detection systems, 21 visibility sensors, with 21 programmable logic controllers, cabinets. So this is basically the PLCs are being used as the field logic, aka the brains out in the field, which also adds a whole level of complexity to the system. In the operations center, we do have the central software that we use for control and monitoring of the field system. It is a proprietary system, which we purchased from ICX, and they call it the Chameleon central software. The goal was to implement the system within 1 year of the initiation of the project. It took us actually roughly 2 years because of the complexity of the system and our system requirements. with changes and enhancements continuing for several years afterwards. I6 was able to deliver what we needed, but through additional contracts, we also requested additional changes and enhancements. The Traffic Management Center software was also updated and configuration changes over several years, improving the system. So the theory of operation, advanced notice of stop vehicles ahead. So this gives motorists situational awareness. It allows motorists to identify if there's a stopped vehicle ahead or a vehicle traveling much slower than freeway speeds. And this essentially allows motorists to time to make decisions. Do they take the next exit and exit the state highway system? Do they slow down, basically adjust their behavior based on the information being provided? It is fully autonomous, and the autonomous system is needed to make the quickest response times possible, and essentially removing the human factor, which sometimes can cause delays. It also is able to do single lane isolation, so identify if a vehicle is stopped on the number 1 lane, the number 2 lane, or number 3 lane, and also determine speeds, which is unique and requires an additional level of complexity on the required for the PLCs to handle that and to report, not only to report, but to take action on those conditions. Many of the locations out there are off-grid or are powered by off-grid power systems, aka solar with batteries. Given the rural area of that region, there isn't very much utility power, or there is utility power in the vicinity, but then that would require purchasing of right-of-way, coordinating with utility. So it does take some time to make that happen. So we opted to use a lot of solar with battery backups. The design criteria there was for a battery system to support the field elements for a minimum of 15 days. History has shown us in the area that the fog can last up to 10 days without it dissipating. So essentially we're in foggy conditions, typically around 10 days without seeing any sunlight. So it is pretty gloomy at times, or can be pretty gloomy in this area. But we added an additional 5 days for a total of 15 days just to have some additional time there if the fog did last longer than that time. And there has been cases where our batteries did run out of juice, and basically the system had to shut down because there wasn't enough battery power, storage of power in the batteries, and it actually has gone more than 15 days. But that is very rare, and typically the fog would dissipate anywhere from 5 to 7 days is on average. The Traffic Management Center software monitors the system in real time. It also has override capabilities if the operators choose to override the system and to take manual control. But typically it's on auto mode. Just the system overview. So this is a very, very basic system overview and it kind of drives the point home. CMS is spaced every, changeable message sign spaced every half mile, increments, microwave vehicle detection every quarter mile, and vehicle spaced, visibility spaced every half mile. So this continues for all 12 miles of the project in both directions. With the visibility and microwave vehicle detection, those are only needed in one direction since they cover both northbound, southbound in this particular area. The basic concept is if visibility conditions are met and speed conditions are met, or are both meeting the given thresholds, the program thresholds, the system will turn on. Let's say if the thresholds are met here at the top of the slide or the image, the system will actually turn on a sign, this sign, let's say upstream of the location, essentially notifying the motorist of potential hazards ahead, either a stop vehicle or a vehicle traveling at much slower speeds than highway speeds, allowing that motorist again to, giving that motorist situational awareness, like I mentioned earlier, and either slow down, take the next exit, perhaps pull over into the shoulder, or take whatever action is needed. And so, of course, this needs to be performed quickly and with a level of precision that requires full autonomy. But the system can be overridden by the central system in the traffic management center. Given certain conditions, we actually have done that and can do that at any time. Let's see, next slide. So the warning message logic. So this logic is actually programmed into the PLCs out in the field and into the central software system. It essentially has 9 scenarios that are programmed, visibility criteria, speed criteria, and our highway patrol pacing, or CHP, which is California Highway Patrol, whether they're pacing or not. And so I won't go too deep into that, given my time constraint here. This is basically a snapshot of our central control system. It actually requires multiple detail pages to communicate the real-time status to our operators so they can monitor the conditions out in the field. And our operators in the traffic management centers typically have 3 dedicated monitors just for this system, so they can basically spread it out and have a bird's eye view of the entire system and monitor what's going on. This snapshot here in particular, I'll just go into a little bit of detail here just to kind of drive home the point. These color boxes here is basically the freeway speeds. So you can see here that the freeway speeds are at 6, 6, and 8 miles per hour per lane. But if you look downstream here, or I'm sorry, upstream, you're actually traveling at highway speeds here in the 60 miles per hour range. And here they're basically slowing down. Speeds are slowing down, but if you look at the visibility here, visibility about 400 feet, which, traveling at 60 miles per hour, 400 feet visibility, that's still fairly fast, but, motorists, they tend to drive fast regardless of the visibility. And as you can see, the visibility is decreasing here as you move to the right, which is northbound, all the way to 98 feet. So from 432 feet down to 98 feet visibility. And, as you would imagine, the speed does slow down as you come across here. I'm not sure why, this maybe perhaps before the message board was turned on, but these signs should actually be on at the moment. And I'm thinking the snapshot was taken before the signs were turned on. But here you would have a sign saying, based on the logic table I showed earlier, that wherever the condition is up ahead, it could be 20 miles per hour, reduce your speed or whatever the case is. Let's see here. Operation and maintenance. So this is basically the fun part. This is a lot what I manage as in my current position. The system has been in use for 15 years, And every fog season, we have a pre, during, and post activities in preparation for each season. I know I'm going a little bit over my time here, so I'll kind of skip ahead. So we do have a dedicated team of engineers and electrician staff, admin staff. Given the age of the system, batteries are being replaced yearly, components are failing and becoming obsolete. And the estimated staff time, we've basically monitor that over the years, and on average, depending what's going on with the system, it could be anywhere from 600 to 1,000 hours operation of maintenance, configuration, the pre-checks every year. So that is quite a bit of time. And like I said, if a system is failing, folks have to troubleshoot it, replace it, recalibrate the system, and get it ready for the up and coming fog season. Some of the lessons learned, although the system does work as intended, we would have done things differently now in hindsight. For example, converted some of the sites to utility power as soon as possible. Point-to-point wireless issues with visibility, line of sight. Trees are growing in the area, and require us to work with our maintenance teams to, trim down the trees to, get that line of sight. Perhaps we could have converted sites to cellular communications, or implemented wired or fiber optic communication between all the sites out there to eliminate issues. And we are doing that in some cases, but my point here is I think we should have started much earlier. Another issue is the off-the-shelf equipment. We weren't using a lot of off-the-shelf equipment, which created issues for us. We're also using non-standard systems, equipment out there, which made it challenging for our maintenance teams and even our engineers to maintain the system, because this particular system was unique in that area and used nowhere else in our district. PLCs, that also requires a particular skill set to manage and program those. So we're either training staff in-house or sending them to training, or hiring staff that has particular experience or expertise in that area. Maintainability and reliability is our mantra. So especially with this system, anything that's being replaced, we're also taking a deeper look into the maintainability and reliability of what we're replacing it with. And sometimes that could be costly. And so there's always a maintainability and reliability versus performance are at odds at times. In the internal debate is it too much? Are we doing too much? And these are some of the conversations we have internally with my managers and my staff. A lot of the things I hear in discussions is, you're in the fog. Do you really need to be told to slow down, right? But the human factor takes a major role there, and folks are going to do what they're going to do. So we're trying to help the situation. Alternative systems that we're looking at right now is there is another system called Iris. It's a central software, and it's being used as an advanced traffic management system, an ATMS. CCTV control, has BDS logging, message board activation, but it also has a module that is that's called Caltrans Automated Warning System. It's similar purpose. It's related to fog, but also does has other features like dust storm or wind capabilities. It also does congestion detection. And so we're actually taking a serious look at that system to potentially utilize that system and replace our current system. The nice feature about the system, this Iris control software, is that it uses all standard equipment in the field. And a lot of the smarts are within the central software and not out in the field, which reduces hardware costs and field maintenance costs out in the field. One thing that's very attractive about this system is that it is open source software that is utilized, that Iris is built on. So if we need to make changes, it's much easier to make changes to the central software. Of course, we have IT entanglements, or the barriers that we have to overcome there. But it's much less expensive than replacing a couple hundred field devices in the field, and all the time it takes to maintain that. Bottom line, the simplicity is very attractive with this system. We're also looking at implementing, CAD technology, whether that's with the fog detection and warning system, or if we decide to adopt the Iris with the CAUS system. CAD usage here can be considered an ancillary system. So it adds to whatever system you're adding it to, and can be completely independent. You can add it, remove it. It won't change the original purpose of the current system. It just enhances it. And so we're looking at using CAD to integrate into cell phones to give motorists advanced notification in their vehicles. Why cell phones? So one of the reasons why we're really pushing cell phones versus onboard units in vehicles, and utilizing roadside units, which CAV is the main focus of CAV. Some of those systems require infotainment systems in vehicles, basically configured and built by the vehicle manufacturers. And right now, penetration or use of those systems is very low. It's the 1 to 3% of vehicles have those integrated into them. And those are typically newer or modified vehicles only. A lot of commercial fleets have that, but not the general public. So one solution we're looking at, and I call it the great equalizer, is the cell phone. So it doesn't matter if you're an executive driving a Mercedes-Benz S-Class, or a student at the local university driving a 2001 Toyota Corolla. I can almost guarantee you that 99% of those folks will have a cell phone in their vehicle, versus an infotainment center that has CAD capability, right? So given that factor, we're taking a serious look at integrating CAD with the use of cell phones. I'm going to skip over the slide. I think I'll bring it to a close here, given I'm going quite a bit over time here. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. Or if we have time here at the end of the presentation, I'm open for questions as well. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jose. Appreciate your time. There is actually one question that I see that's for you, from Robert. He asks if there's any restrictions on types of vehicles allowed during wind events, such as no motorcycles, glass trucks, as wind alerts are given.
Yeah, so we do, our traffic management center will place messages on our message boards to advise semi-trucks or RVs or trucks with trailers to use alternate routes. And we usually send them to the east side of the valley, typically down Route 99, to avoid the Interstate 5 windy conditions. So we do not necessarily detour, but recommend alternative routes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jose. And Yeah, Robert, you responded. Thanks for the information. I saw there was a sidebar back and forth with Mike and Jawad. It looks like that was answered. Some good information on VSL and data integration with uh, aggregators like Waze. So good information all around. Thanks again to our speakers, Jose, Mike, and Roy. All great information. Let's go ahead and see if I can pull up the rest of the slides here before we close out. And again, if you have any other questions for these gentlemen, their contact information is in the slides, which will be recorded and placed on NOCoE's webpage at the end of this, as well as in the chat pod if you have any questions as well for them. I'm sure they'd be happy to share any information that you'd like to request from them. See if I don't know, Adam, if you could pull up the rest of the slides here.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. All right, so let's go ahead and cover the last couple slides here. You can go ahead and go to the next one, Adam. So I wanted to highlight just a few more resources that we have available on our webpage. We do have a low visibility publication link there, as well as highlighting variable speed limits on I-77, and there's also some Ohio information on I-90 for their winter weather conditions in particular. Next slide, please. One of the things that that my team has been involved in is the solar eclipse. That actually was about 3 weeks ago. We're compiling all this information. We had a peer exchange and a very well attended webinar. Over, I think, 700 people or so attended it. So there's a lot of interest in it. These planned special events are continually happening. We have the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming up in 2026. We have the World Cup, we have the Olympics. So more and more information and attention is being placed on some of these events. If you have any information from the solar eclipse in particular, we're compiling that information for our final report. We'll be reporting that out in a future webinar, looking at a case study and final report for key takeaways on what DOTs had to deal with the eclipse, as well as traffic and mobility impacts, with a particular emphasis on transportation operations, particularly in road weather, work zones, and incident management. So if you have any information, I've been obviously contacted by a whole bunch of DOTs, but we're always looking for more information, more stories, experiences, and pictures. We'll be sure to cite you and your agency if we use your materials. A lot of after-action reviews have been taking place that we've been invited to. So for those who have looped us in, thank you. Always very insightful to be looped into your agency's work, your amazing work. And coming from a state DOT myself, I know all the preparation that has to take place for some of these large events. So feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to share any of those. Next slide, please. We do have some new resources that we wanted to highlight. We have a climate resilience risk assessment tool and guide, literature review, tech scan, and interviews report. It's actually a really good report. I read through it again recently. It's about 70 pages, but it's packed full of really good resilience information and state of the practice from around the country on what state and local DOTs are doing in the arena of resilience. We also have a Pathfinder fact sheet looking at Arizona DOT's coordinated messages during snowstorm impacts. And then adverse weather and automated vehicles. There's an AV and meteorology summit coming up in Michigan in June. So there's seems to be renewed interest in the arena of automated vehicles and adverse weather. We did wrap up phase 3 a couple of years ago. Really good report if you'd like to take a look at it. We also have a flyer on our webpage if you'd like to learn more. Or as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me as well. Let's go to the next slide, please. Real quick, I wanted to highlight a few grant opportunities. The SMART grants did for this fiscal year just close. I think they announced the phase 1 awards in March. This is an annual grant program, so just because you miss out on 1 year, you can look forward to FY25. As you can see, there's approximately 100 million that's awarded in fiscal years FY22 through 26. Speaking on road weather management in particular, you can see that the city of Fort Worth, Texas, was awarded a 23 SMART Stage 1 grant to take a look at ground, low altitude, and roadway sensors for micro weather modeling to improve safety and mobility on their roadways. Obviously, there's a whole lot of other grants that have been awarded for really interesting projects, but road weather grabbed some of that funding, so always happy to see that. And then the next slide will cover the AID demonstration program, the Accelerating Innovation Deployment Demonstration Program. That is currently open until, I believe, May 28th. These are for, also can be used for road weather programs and projects. Some of the awarded grants you can see below as they pertain to road weather include Connecticut's implemented management system on GPS for their AVL system. Folks who are well aware of winter operations know all about AVL, but it can be used with a myriad of other programs and projects. And then you can see there, New Jersey was also awarded a pilot to provide real-time information. So again, road weather is being very well represented in these grant opportunities. So take a look at that page. If you have any questions on the grant process, feel free to reach out to myself. Always happy to help state and local DOTs grab some grant funding. Next slide, please. Our next road weather spotlight webinar is going to be on July 10th. We're going to be covering the hurricane outlook as well as the solar eclipse impacts. We're not 100% sure on the title, but those are probably the main topics that we'll be covering. You'll see more information sent out from NOCoE on how to register for that, or you can click the link there as well to register. Next slide, and I think we're coming up. Yep, that's all we have for the slides. So there's my contact information. You can subscribe to our program updates as well as NOCoE's updates. As I mentioned, NOCoE will be posting this on the recording on their webpage. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself. There's my contact information. Thank you for everything that you all are doing to improve safety and mobility on our roadways. I wanted to once again thank our speakers sharing their fantastic information on how to manage and mitigate low visibility events. Also, thank you to all of you for attending. Thanks again to NOCoE for hosting us, and always continue appreciating your partnership. And thanks to ICF on the contractor side for helping pull together the slides and the speakers as well. So with that, thanks again. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you at the July webinar, July 10th. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good one.